Talk to me a little bit about the trends that you're seeing, Justin, in lending as it pertains to business. Because a lot of times, what we talk about is different ways to creatively structure deals when you're making an acquisition, or you already have a business and you're trying to make a cash injection of capital or whatever that is. But I know there have been a lot of changes pertaining to availability of capital in different ways and SBA. So what are you seeing in the market right now that's kind of interesting or different than what you used to see?
So in February, in fact, Florida changed its guidelines. Florida and California changed their guidelines on how much they can lend out, and the criteria to lend, particularly across the nation, has gotten super, super stringent just because of how the banks are,
Risk tolerance has changed.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to loans, when it comes to gaining any type of capital, what we try and focus on first is making sure that your business is set up correctly. Because I'm dealing with a client who's doing 8 figures, and his business isn't even set up correctly. So when he went to go get a loan, or when he went to go get a credit line, he couldn't get approved because of the fact that he didn't have a established business credit score or credibility to the institutions. So first and foremost, what we want to look at is if the business is even credible or lendable to the institution, from the institution to the business.
Yeah, so great point. And I've seen the same thing. It actually happens, not just with lending, it happens when folks decide in their mind, I'm ready to make an exit. And it's usually sort of an arbitrary decision that comes from something happened to make them decide, life situation, whatever it is, it's time for me to exit. And often you start doing the normal sort of pre-due diligence that you would do in preparing to sell the business. And then you look at what they hope they can get for it. And then you look at what they can get for it based upon what they've built in the structures that they have in place, whether it's compliance, legal, credit score, SOPs, all those things. It sounds like there's some similarities. So what are some things that are maybe great to have for when you're going to talk to a lender, whether it's SBA or, even I would say high limit credit card or, factoring or anything like that? What are some great things that, folks have that increase their chance of success? And then maybe what are some things that if you see, ooh, this is going to be a tough row?
Cash flow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's shocking, right? Do you have cash flow?
Yeah. So cash flow would be first and foremost.
And documented cash flow,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. You don't want to keep taking a loss.
Yeah.
Especially trying to create a succession plan or, if you want to sell in the future. But second is making sure that you have a profile that has history. Because if a bank is trying to lend to you and this is the first time you got a loan or you haven't gotten anything, period.
And when you're saying the nuance, I think it's important that business people forget, doesn't necessarily mean you personally.
You mean the business.
It means the
business
entity itself.
Correct. Yep. So making sure that the entity has trade lines attached to it. It doesn't matter if it's smaller trade lines, because if you have aged trade lines, the probability of you getting funding is a lot higher.
Yeah.
Right. So with what you said about credit cards, if you have higher lines of credit cards, then the probability of you getting a higher line of, say, a business line of credit or a term loan, whatever it is a lot higher.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you said trade lines, and this is an interesting one because there's a little bit of misunderstanding or even disagreement over, probably between banks, over what constitutes a trade line, right? So what types of things would be included in that and what not? So the specific thing I'm thinking of is that some I know will count a company-owned vehicle asset as a trade line. Some won't. Some of them specifically want vendor trade lines and credit. So what are you seeing there? Is it kind of depending on who you're going to?
Yeah, so it all depends what you want.
Yeah.
What the business entity wants. Because there's 2 types of trade lines in every company. It's bank-owned or lending trade lines and net trade lines. What lenders want to see is that you actually made your payments on time and the utilization that you've used on those trade lines are good, right? When it comes to purchasing a vehicle, having a obviously auto trade line on there is a good thing. But if this is the first time that you're actually getting a vehicle, having some sort of net 30, net 60, net 90 account on there is a good perk too.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, because we talked to a ton of people combined that at the end of the day don't have business credit at all. They might have a Gold Amex, maybe like a Chase Sapphire or some random stuff, right? And they're like, yeah, I got business. And then
PayPal credit.
At the end of the day, you want to get credit stuff like the Amex doesn't even count. They're not looking at it. You basically have nothing now. You got a PG, everything with some personal guarantee stuff. What are like 3 tips or 5 actionable steps? Like if someone wants to go, okay, how do I actually even start building business credit, and how can I take that all the way up into using it as arbitrage, right? Because the thing about people is they don't really think on how to manipulate money. They look at it as debt. They're like, I don't want that. But, you know, we were helping somebody, we're not going to say the person, whatever, but you were able to get them a line of credit, and it had very high interest, but then you got them another one that had significantly lower interest and a much longer payout, and he didn't want to do it. And we were trying to explain, dude, grab this one, use this one to pay 95% of this off, and then you have twice the time and 20% less of the interest. You just solved your problems in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Right. And so he didn't get that. So one, how do you explain these things to people because they don't get it? And how do you help people start building business credit, because it is not in the slightest similar to personal credit, right?
So I think first and foremost is arithmetic. Just understanding how math works, right? If you can get a credit line for 5-6%, and if you can arbitrage that and pay down or pay off anything, if you're making the spread, right? So if you can get a 12-14% return on that.
In hindsight, it sounds logical because you're logical, but we've seen that that's not the case at all, right? Like, I think it's almost like, I think it's educating like a child, like, hey, this is not debt. You know, you look at debt as a positive in real estate, but you don't look at debt as a positive. It's debt manipulation.
Absolutely.
It's debt to loan to income, kind of, you know, it's arbitrage at its purest form. But when it's kind of like school, right? Like you look at college and you have this expectation, like, okay, 4 years, no job, like I'm in debt, blah, 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 and then whatever. And that works that way. Yep. Entrepreneurship, like, oh man, I bought something for $100. Like, I'm not rich. This is garbage. I can't do it. It's the same thing. Like real estate. Oh no, I understand that. But you okay, apply it to your business. Right. Whoa, that's crazy. I don't want to go out of business. This is exactly how you wouldn't, you know. I really think it's explaining it more, because math goes out, the basic 7-year-old mathematics just go out the window when it comes into that kind of scenario.
I think their risk tolerance is a lot lower when they just don't understand when you arbitrage, you just want to make a net on top of the percentage that you already gotten. So if you gotten that 6%, and if you can make net 5% on top of that 6, you're net positive.
Even 3.
Right.
It's a bump more.
Some of this,
You're fine.
To me, having just a lot of conversations with business owners at different levels of that journey, from just starting out and you're bootstrapping, and the behaviors that you would have bootstrapping, in fairness, are different, because one, no one's going to give you credit. The only thing you're probably going to be able to do is get, personal credit cards that you then manipulate, leverage, arbitrage to move yourself up, and then eventually you get the business one, and then so on and so forth. To folks that have 9-figure businesses, and you're dealing with huge credit facilities and some of the same things, but also some cool bells and whistles that you wouldn't have. To me, the hardest delineation is that we have been conditioned for so long as personal finance consumers on the personal side. Debt is bad. Bless Dave Ramsey's heart, but he's done a good job with helping folks understand the dangers of debt in terms of your personal finances if you don't do it and use it correctly. And I would agree with a lot of what he says. Yep. Where I think Dave Ramsey goes wrong is when he starts to get into giving advice on business and investing, because then you're in a situation where it doesn't always make sense, because in business, you can use leverage intelligently to be able to scale at a higher velocity than you would if you just bootstrap. Now, you can't be an idiot about it. And there are businesses all the time that we see that have over leveraged themselves. Why? It's the first thing that you said. They don't have the cash flow to support whatever debt that they're incurring. So everything that we're talking about starts with the base understanding that you know what your cash flow is and that you have good solid free cash flow. And then you just take the solid free cash flow and you understand what the monthly and then annualized interest payments are going to be.
Put it in an envelope.
And as long as you can pay it and use the leverage to free up some of that cash flow, and you have something that cash is better suited to be used for. So e-commerce, usually it's going to be inventory, it's going to be scaling,
Advertising, whatever.
ad spend, whatever that is. Brick and mortar, it might be FF&E, for equipment that you need to be able to go to that next level in your service offerings. There's a very material difference between the way that you would approach debt and the level of risk that you would take on in business, to me, versus your personal life. And I just think folks have a hard time separating the two, and they want to run their business using the same kind of decision tree that they would in their personal finances.
I've also seen that it's kind of industries think differently too, because like some are just, they think like, oh, I have to, and some are like, oof, right? Like internet marketing, service businesses, more online stuff is a little like, oh, they don't get it, even though like in some instances they're more astute, smarter, and like whatever. But you go local and equipment, all trucks, apparatuses for whatever, they're running net 30, 60, 90s. They're doing loans. They're doing all of that, and it's just natural and logical. But in the other one, what are you doing?
Is that better? Yeah. Very good.
But in the other stuff, like people are significantly more scared. So now that we've kind of, beat that a little, how does someone, let's say I start Texas Bobblehead LLC, right? How do I go from my personal guarantee at the beginning, like I'm using maybe a $4,000 credit card that pretty much is PG'd by me, all the way up to $250,000 not American Express credit card, and then lines of credit, and it also in that explain the difference between a card, a line of credit, and a loan, because people don't know that either.
So if you're to scale Carlos's Cowboy Bobblehead, first thing you would do is, obviously, like I said earlier, set up the business correctly. Because if you get low lines of credit cards that you can leverage 0% for a certain amount of time,
usually a year,
there is going to be PG because that business is brand new.
Right.
So what you want to do is you also want to set up net 30 and net 60 accounts over the course of 6 to 8 to 10 months. That way you're building credibility, right? You don't want to go in and apply for credit cards until you have that credibility. Mm-hmm. Once you get that credibility, then you go in for the higher lines of credit. So you go in for the higher lines of credit. What I typically do is I get 3 credit cards, 0% credit cards that we're going to leverage. One is going to be for ads. One is going to be for any type of material, say it's the bobbleheads that we're going to bring in. Mm-hmm. And one is going to be for, say you're going to pay influencers to talk about it or anything like that, right? So each card has a specific duty. One is to generate revenue. The other is to bring in inventory. And the other is to get attention. So if I bring those 3 together, now you just scaled that business 3 to 6 months later. Now we can arbitrage that business right now. If it's cash flowing $8,000, $10,000, okay, let's get a line of credit, a business line of credit. Mm-hmm. Now we just rinse and repeat that same concept. You still keep the cards, right? We're still going to keep that concept the same. However, the business is growing without personal guarantee. Mm-hmm. And so setting up the business correctly from the start is what's going to take your business to the next level. Because like I said earlier, is a lot of business owners are just graduated employees.
Yeah.
Right?
They just they're high-paying jobs.
Exactly.
Yep.
They just know that they can do that shit and get it done, not know how to run a business, and so, or operate the business. And so when you structure the business correctly from the start, the advantages that you get is exponential rather than somebody that doesn't know what they're doing on the business side, but they can still operate the business. However, when it comes to getting funding or capital,
And do you mean by setting up correctly? Because I'm sure you get this all the time. It's Bobblehead Boss LLC, and I basically treat it like my bank account, and or if it's not, then it's just a single business basically, which is terrible. Like I could get sued, I can get in trouble, right? Like is that what you mean, or?
just set up the entity correctly. Get a Dun & Bradstreet number, get your EIN. Don't ever put your social security number on anything. Use the EIN, and just comes down to setting up trade lines on that entity itself.
Let's go back for a second because I don't want to assume that people understand the significance of this. So we just talked about essentially an ascension path to get you to the point of business ownership where you no longer are being asked to sign PGs. And what is the significance of PG? Like, why does it matter for someone to get to a point where they can have access to credit without having to sign a personal guarantee?
So the biggest thing with personal guarantee is it doesn't matter what your business is doing. If you have credit cards that's tied to personal guarantee, you personally are liable. If your business can't pay for it, they're still going to tie it to you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the reason why I say just get low line credit cards when you first start out your business, is because your business doesn't have credibility.
You could also set up your life to where you owe nothing, which is another podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll cover that. We'll cover that stay tuned for more. Cover that in a different show.
Yeah. So just getting rid of the personal guarantees, like anybody can start a business and just apply for credit cards. However, what's going to happen is all of those credit cards are going to be tied to PGs, personal guarantees.
Yep.
I want every business owner to remove themselves from the business of any liability like the personal guarantee.
Yeah, yeah. And it really ties back to the conversation we had where folks, the reason that they have this interesting mental block in using leverage in their business that they wouldn't necessarily have in their personal finances, part of that is the PG. Because initially when you start out, there is a very real connection between your business and the potential downside to your your own personal finances. I'll give you an example. So I had a client a few years ago who purchased a business, and it was right in the middle of COVID, and they were doing, how can I say this without revealing too much? Let's just say they were in the financial services space, but they were in the B2B financial services space. So they're doing work for other businesses on financials, and it was in e-commerce specifically. So he purchased this business.
Real quick, stop. It's his S's. It's the way he's the S's. That's what, and the mic just takes it all the way in.
Is it just too close to my face?
No, it's actually perfect.
It's literally the way your S.
Hey,
strong.
Shawnee.
It won't sound like that after it's been processed.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
It's just a live feed.
Yeah.
All right. I sound like the owl from Winnie the Pooh. Oh. What was I talking about? So I actually had a client who he purchased a business using an SBA loan, and he did it at a time when e-commerce was booming right during COVID. And this business that he owned was a B2B financial services business supporting other e-commerce companies. And so, I think he had about a $2 million SBA loan. And at the time that he bought it, the cash flow more than paid for the debt service on the loan. Well, he had a PG, and we all know what's happened with e-commerce and the particular niche that he was in. The demand for that service was heavily dependent upon other people acquiring. So the demand just tanked. And so his business went down by like 70%. And now he's in a situation where he still has to make those monthly payments, even though the revenue doesn't support it. So what's he doing? He's having to do all kinds of crazy sort of side consulting just to try to make the debt service payments. And we had this whole conversation, and his initial thought was, well, I'll just walk away. And I'm like, well, hold on. Let's have a conversation about, maybe, look, sometimes that happens. It stinks, but sometimes that happens. But first, let's have a conversation about what that means for you forever. Because you put yourself in a situation where if you PG'd a loan, that's SBA backed and you walk away, my understanding is you're pretty much done ever getting an SBA loan again.
Yeah. So initially, whenever you sign any type of, or when you close on any type of SBA, because it is federally backed, it's just like a Fannie Mae.
Yeah.
Student
loan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same concepts.
Yeah. And student loans are like cockroaches. You know?
Exactly.
Like,
They don't go away.
never die, never go away.
So that's the biggest thing is, making sure, like when you're starting the business, is making sure that, it sounds like a great idea, but making sure that you're keeping up with the performance.
Yeah.
That way you can continuously increase cash flow, obviously, to pay for the debt service.
Yeah. Cash flow.
So you said something that I don't want to be rude to everybody, but most of you actually won't understand it. So explain debt service and cash flow, because people say it, but they don't really get it. And I think that's what freaks people out, because a lot of times people say cash flow, oh yeah, it's got that in there. Like I was like, it's not exactly that, right? And so people kind of make mistakes from that and thinking the wrong thing and getting a loan towards the wrong concept is what makes people be able to not pay that, or
Right.
not be able to pay that.
Right. So debt service is whatever money is owed from any type of liabilities. So if it's a loan, line of credit, anything that you owe debt to, that's your debt service. That's that payment that you have to, whether it's monthly or annualized, whatever it is. And cash flow is just the margin between debt service and what you're able to make. I mean,
Where people go really sideways in acquisitions and they make mistakes if they're not used to these conversations is they'll pre-due diligence a deal, and they'll do a quick write-up of like, okay, here's what the deal means to me, here's what it's going to cost to acquire the business, here's what the cash flow is. And shockingly often they don't account for what the debt service is going to cost them. So if you take a loan out, and to make it super simple, if Lowe's wants to buy a business from you for $1 million and he has $200,000 in cash, and he says to me, Mr. JB SBA Bank, hey, would you loan me the additional $800,000 that I need to buy this business? Well, he has to factor in the interest and principal payments monthly and annually that I'm going to charge him in order to give him that opportunity. And a lot of folks, when they look at cash flow of a business that they're looking at buying, they don't think about the idea that, oh, shoot, I have to figure out how much of this it's going to cost what am I going to have to take out of this to cover that debt service? Is what's left enough for me to, one, continue to grow and to pay for the things that I need to? And also, did I just create a situation where I've just acquired an asset that doesn't cash flow well enough after debt service to pay me anything?
Yeah.
So I just acquired.
That's the exact perfect explanation.
Yeah.
Because people think cash flow, like, all right, that's my money. Like, no, it's not.
Nope.
Like, no, it's not at all. And that, when people buy, like, dude, this cash flowing like crazy. Like, well, right now to that, like, what are you getting at? Like, how's this going to work overall? You know what I mean? And people don't factor that in. And that was just chef's kiss.
Well, and there's trends too. So e-commerce is a great example. E-commerce margins and OpEx, so we can get into some other things, they're all related. So OpEx is operating expenses. OpEx is through the roof right now.
which kills cash flow.
Kills cash flow and why is that happening in e-commerce? Because most of these platforms where folks are running ads, the ad costs have gone absolutely bananas. And so what maybe was costing you 12 to 15% of your cash flow to run ads might be costing you 50 to 60% now. Well, where's that other money coming from? It's not like you're making so much more that it's easy to, because it's directly related to scale. Right. So the number of ads that you run is directly proportionate to the number of things that you sell. It's not like well, we can raise ad spend by 20% and we're going to get 80% more sales. It's not like that. So certain industries are even more sensitive to OpEx getting out of control. And so really when I'm looking at deals on the buy side, I'm always trying to look at worst case scenarios and I try to build in a buffer. So, okay, cool. For the last 3 years, you're spending 1.6% of your total gross revenue on marketing. I know that that's not realistic. If I want to grow this business, I'm going to have to spend significantly more than that. So I had to bake that in. Or staffing. Like, you don't have 3 key people that I know we're going to need and I know what it's going to cost, and I have to bake that in too and then back that out. So you have to have the full financial picture, which then leads into how much are we short here? And then you can talk about lending, but you still have to make sure there's enough of the pie to pay for, ideally, you want to have enough of the pie so that you can pay for the debt service, cover all your OPEX, and actually make some money for yourself.
Yeah, at least at the beginning, can the cash flow help me grow the business? Because the cash flow people teach basically like, oh, do this, and then like it's basically like a passive business. Like, and then you'll just you'll just sit down and money comes in every month. Like, no, like
I'm still looking for one of those. I've never found one in 15 years.
It's all good, but I'm in debt, essentially, right? Like logically, whatever you get it. How much cash flow is left, and what am I going to need to grow this business, and how long till I pay myself, and how much? You have to build a plan. We've worked with people that, they're trying to buy businesses, and like, hey, this doesn't look good. He's like, do you have a plan? Do you understand like how to scale? And he's like, we're gonna look at that when we're getting close to buying. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like,
no. Worse,
don't do that at all.
We'll figure it out after.
Yeah, like you're like, dude, like, are you? This is a prank. Like, do you want to go to like debt or jail? Like, And the other thing people don't look at is like, look at what his cash flow. Like, what did the cash flow a year ago and 2 years ago? Oh, it's trending down. Why?
Yeah.
No one asked
I always love those
no one asked the
conversations.
weird questions.
Yeah, I love those conversations because you know me well enough to know that my response is going to be, when someone says something like, well, we're just going to buy it and we'll figure it out later. And I'm so direct. I'm usually just like, you could do that, or you could make money and feed your family. I mean, you can't do both, but I mean, if that's the direction that you want to go, then absolutely, by all means.
I'm just gonna get this chick pregnant and see if she likes me. Like,
Exactly, right. And if it doesn't work out, we'll just figure it out later.
Like there's not consequences after this.
No big deal.
I think that's the difference between a startup and a purchasing an existing business, right?
Yeah.
Because it's you're going to look at it through two different lenses. A startup is how much you personally have to take a lot of hits, right? Your personal credit is going to take a shot because
you're maxing out everything.
The amount of risk that you have
if you're
to
not
take.
getting funding, like
Exactly.
you're basically broke until you're not.
Exactly. So that's the risk with starting a business.
That's why I hate startups.
Yeah, this podcast is not for startups.
No. If you're a startup, you should turn this off right away.
Yeah, go
right
get a
away.
job.
With purchasing an existing business, the first thing you do is, okay, what is the cash flow?
Yeah.
What is the cash flow, and what is my debt service going to be?
Yep.
And what is the buffer in between?
And what's my roadmap?
Exactly. Because, and like what you said is, I don't want to see the last year or 2 years. I want to see what the trend has been since operation. What has the peak been? Where are we at now? Is it up or is it down?
Is it
right?
seasonal? Like,
Exactly.
what's happening?
And I think what a lot of people have to do when they start looking into purchasing businesses is, what do you bring to the table? Because
why are you buying this?
exactly,
What's your value add?
Exactly.
Right.
Because if you're purchasing this business and you know nothing about freaking accounting, or you know nothing about any type of vending machine,
Cash versus accrual.
yeah,
What? That's,
why are you purchasing it? Because how are you going to solve the problems for that business? At the end of the day, it's still a business, and if you get a loan on it, you're still personally guaranteed if it's going through SBA. And so making sure that you do your due diligence ahead of time, because of the fact that if you don't know, or if you can't scale this business, it's going to continue to tank.
well, and look, shameless plug. The shameless plug is, if you don't know how to do that, and look, there's no shame in not knowing how to do it. Most people don't know how to do that. If you don't know how to do it, hire somebody who does, to represent your interests and to walk you through the process of like, okay, here's 13 things that you didn't think of. And here's what it can mean to you if you sign this, or if you agree to this clause, or if you structure the deal in this way, or, hey, this looks a little lean. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to profitably run this business and pay yourself. Are you comfortable with not making any money while you do X, Y, and Z? You really, if you're unbelievable at negotiations and you have a rock solid understanding of finances and leverage and deal structure, by all means, go kill it.
But if you don't have understanding,
man,
and even if you do, but you don't get business,
or if you don't have the time, because
Right,
it's a
right.
time component too. Like when I look at buying a business, and with White Buffalo Advisors, when Los and I are working together with our team and we engage with a client, it's not unusual for us to go through 100 confidential information memorandums for every single deal. So every time somebody wants to buy something, we're looking at 100 businesses minimum. And we're pretty quick at that because we've done it so much. We kind of know where to look. We know what the key points are. And we've already also filtered that down. You make a great point about in most industries, when someone engages us on buy side, if a company's been in existence for less than 5 years, it's out automatically, because it doesn't mean that it's not a great business. It doesn't mean that it's not growing. It means that I'm not going to have enough data to reliably understand trends and what's happening. Almost anybody can have an 18 to 24 month business that looks really good. And then 2 years later, you got a problem. This is what happened with Thrasio, where they bought a bunch of Amazon FBA businesses and different types of
Looking
e-commerce
at
that
math.
looked
They just looked at
unbelievable,
math about
but they'd
it.
only existed for 18 to 24 months.
And they didn't build a plan on like, how are we actually going to scale it past Amazon?
What are we gonna
They
do
were like,
after
the
we-
math looks good. I'm like, do you understand you have to spend money on now other channels?
Well, and what happens when Amazon decides, because they're a unilateral actor in a relationship, and make no mistake, Amazon folks didn't understand this for a long time. I think most of them do now. You have a business partner in Amazon, whether you like it or not. And Amazon is so big and powerful, and they may have a competing agenda to what you have. And that's exactly what's happened. So Amazon never cared about making money from products being sold on their website. That was never their play. Their play was always, we're acquiring the data. We're acquiring the data on customer behavior, customer decisions, every minute thing that happens in the buy process. Oh, and by the way, we're also acquiring your data of what you sell, where you sell it from, your supply chain, your manufacturer, because we're way bigger than you and we can afford to buy cargo ships and you can't. So
and we can put them on first place without spending ads.
So Amazon's fees, I probably, just in the last month, I've talked to 6 different sellers who are very high level. All of them are 8+ figure sellers on Amazon. And their profit margins are shrinking at breakneck pace, mostly because of consistent and large increases in fees from Amazon, whether it's storage or per order fees or PPC. And the same thing is happening in e-commerce. It's happening. There's just a squeeze happening. So you have to know that what are the areas of a business that can present risk, even if it doesn't exist today, so you can see around the corner. And so if you don't have the ability to think about that sort of stuff all day, which is being M&A advisors, that's all we do, is we just try to see around the corner to the best of our ability and understand, here's what the business looks like today. Here's what we think it could look like based upon, large scale macro trends and also what's happening with the business itself. And also, if we have ideally at least 5 years worth of information, we kind of know, okay, you're trying to sell a business on a multiple of year 3, but years 1, 2, 4, and 5 are nothing like year 3. You have an outlier here. So we can't give you a valuation. What we're going to do is we're going to average those 5 years together. And whatever that EBITDA number is over 5 years, we're going to base our multiple on that, because we're not going to give you a multiple on the very best day that you have ever had. To me, that's like Instagram filters. Like, you're not going to marry a woman because you saw her on one Instagram picture with the most badass filter that you've ever seen. Like, you might want to meet her in person, spend a little time with her. Buying a business on 1 year's good revenue out of 5, not really a good best practice, but it happens all the time.
Well, people also lie all the time, right? We were talking to a guy who was like, dude, I was just, we were consulting with him, and he was like, I want to sell my agency, I think. I was like, yeah. He's like, dude, I just met a guy who says that he can do it. And I was like, I know how much your agency makes. Like, what did he say out of curiosity? He's like, he said he can get probably like $5 million for it. I was like, it was negative 40,000 one time. We might have to chop that. It was negative at one point. Now it's about to do 2 million maybe, and that's 2 years. And then basically this 1 year, you're gonna net like $500,000. You're gonna get 10. What the fuck? That guy lied to you. I was like, that guy's lying to you. You're not going to get one. You're going to get one time. You're going to get what the business netted again, right? Because it's an agency, and that's how they value it.
No savvy buyer is not going to buy. You might get an idiot if you're lucky, but you can't. Count
You're
on
not
that.
getting an idiot to buy a $5 million business at a $500,000, because that's why he's not an idiot.
Yeah, they're not paying you on potential future
No,
revenue.
but people think that all the time. Like, oh, dude, like I saw this. How many ecom people are like, oh, my business is worth 7 times? Like, no, when Thrasio had someone else's money, it was. Now that it's normal times again, maybe 3.
I was in a room the other day, giving a talk to a group of, all of them had 8-figure, a few of them had 9-figure e-com businesses. It wasn't just Amazon. It was all over the place, some direct response, kind of a good mix of people in the room. And one of the hardest things that I always have to do in that particular space, and it varies, it's cyclical, so it varies by year as to which industry it is, but there's ebbs and flows of multiples in industries that happen. Right now, I put up a graphic on the board, and it had 10 different industry codes, and I showed the average multiple range by industry. And so everybody in the room is an e-commerce person of some type. And so I'm going down, I'm like, okay, healthcare, it's anywhere from 5 to 7. And of course, this is assuming companies of a certain size. If you're sub 8 figures, it's a different conversation. But if you're 8 figures or more, this is kind of what you're looking for. So I'm going down, I'm like, oh, here's 5 to 7, here's, 9 to 13, And then I get to e-commerce. And this was a 6-month-old slide, so it's actually worse now. And I told them that. And it was, 1 to 2.75. And all of them were like, no way. My friend said that he sold his business for 8. I'm like, you're probably right. He did that in
2017.
2019, and it was worth that then. Today, it's worth not even 1 to 3. I'm seeing businesses go for a discount at 1. So I'm seeing them go for 0.75. Why? Because they know that your numbers are not real, because the costs of doing business have skyrocketed to a point where it's not as profitable as it was. And then the other thing that's happening on the other side of the coin to really shape that market, the number of buyers is shrinking fast because aggregators aren't doing well. Private equity is pretty cold right now on e-commerce. And so there's just not a lot of folks to buy these businesses. So it's brutal when you have to say, look, you're in an industry right now where if you're making good money every year and you're cash flowing well, keep it and wait. And actually, when you read trends, it may be a good time to consider an acquisition because you're never likely to find a time where e-commerce businesses are devalued so much. So if you're really good at it, it probably makes sense to snap up a few because there's going to be a bounce.
That's a good podcast for another day too.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, now's the right time to buy.
Yeah.
If you are in the e-com space and the multiple is that low, why not get a few on a discount? Oh,
Yeah, and you can even get them lower because you can do creative finance.
Exactly.
deals and a
100%.
bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Especially in that industry.
Yeah, the owner is just probably so beat up.
Some
he
will
just
take,
wants cash flow.
they might
man.
they might just take back end equity on whatever.
Yeah.
Just keep paying me something here.
Give me some sort of salary plus and like balloon it at the end, or like give me. I just want to check, and I don't want to deal with this.
That's what we've done with a few deals that we've done is we would purchase a business and we kept the owner on as salary as well as giving the owner health care because once they sell, now they got to find independent care,
which is really stressful for people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so we kept them on his salary and then we added them as a company paid health insurance policy.
Yeah.
So we were able to get the purchase price significantly lower. And
are some of those, we can cut this if you don't like it, but are some of those essentially like no-show jobs? So you're doing it essentially like, oh yeah, I'm going to give you a job and healthcare, and all you have to do is agree to take second bite at the end. For a lot of folks, that's all they want, because when you're making deals, people get hung up in numbers, and the numbers matter. We've talked about that. We talked about why, knowing your numbers. But the other thing that's incredibly important in making deals is understanding that consideration is a broad term.
Why that person wants to do it.
Yeah, consideration means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I personally have been in businesses before where, there were times when it's like, no, I built something really great. I'm looking to get the highest multiple I possibly can and the most amount of cash. That happens. I've also personally been in businesses where I absolutely hated what I built. I just, for whatever reason, I'm looking around and going, why did I even do this? I don't enjoy doing this. I don't want to do it. I hate it. I would probably just shut this thing down, but it has value. And so somebody else came to me and said, listen, don't shut it down. I'll acquire it and I'll give you X% of gross revenue for a fixed number of years. And I'm like, yeah, I will totally do that deal. So you never should assume. And then to your point with healthcare, especially in brick and mortar businesses, but others as well, healthcare is a big deal. Health insurance, because it's a really scary thing if you've never had to do it, to try to go out and figure out, how do I do this? What's the best way for me to do it? So if they know they're going to have guaranteed income, and the amount doesn't have to be crazy, If they know they have guaranteed income, they don't really have to do anything except for answer a phone call every now and then, so you have a question. And they have health care for a fixed amount of time. And they know that they can potentially get a chunk of money at the end because you may be doing a roll-up or whatever it is. That can be really compelling.
Yeah, that's the reason why we kind of structure our deals that way.
Yeah.
When they talk about creative finance, I'm not even getting into the creative finance side of it. I just want the perks to take care of that business owner that wants to either retire or get out of the business.
Yeah.
Right. Because we know that when we come in, we're going to put in systems and processes to scale and grow that business regardless.
Yeah.
Right. So we look at that as debt service to make sure that we can at least cover that expense from the get.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
makes sense.
It's a very, I think it's an artful and creative way to do deals. The other thing I really like about that is it shows a level of honor and respect to the person that has built the business, and you're really saying,
And they care about
yeah,
that.
we're gonna make sure that you're taken care of. We want to make sure that you and your family are okay and honor what you have done. And while we're doing that, you can be transparent about the fact that, of course, it still has to make sense in the scope of our financials and what we're trying to do, but we want to make sure that you're taken care of. So if there's a way for us to structure this deal so that you're good, and we also make money in the meantime and at the end of it, and you also get to go along the ride with us and to benefit from that, the old Godfather, you get to wet your beak a little bit. If you get to wet your beak on the back end too, those are the kind of deals where folks tend to be excited and happy. And you usually at cutover. So cutover, for those that don't know, it's when the business changes hands. So usually at cutover, there's you can almost physically see it when someone that is just ready. They're ready to move on from a company. And when that cutover happens, you almost see this little pause of like, wait, but I don't own this anymore. It's yours. And sometimes there's panic that happens for a minute just because they're used to one thing. But a lot of times right after that panic is this massive physical release, like this sigh of relief where they're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to take calls from payroll anymore. I don't have to take supplier phone calls. I don't have to be the person who comes in as a closer for customers that are like the highest level of ticked off. Like it's somebody else's responsibility, and there's value in that.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I think this was a great pod. We're going to chop this up, send it to the boys in England, and don't forget to
The lads.
check out the bobblehead boss coming soon.
Yeah, bobblehead boss, racist version.
We'll see you guys.